Hello and welcome back to IGEC 2022. And if you're just tuning in, welcome for the first time. I'm here with Kelsey Moser and Peter Dunn. My name is Nick Geraci, and we're here to talk about the finer points of talent development in the LEC and the LCS, the premier League of Legends esports leagues in Europe and North America, respectively. First of all, thank both of you for joining me, and thank you so much to our title sponsor, WeMade, for making this all possible. How are both of you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Thank you for having us. Yeah, looking forward to discussing about some talent development strategies.
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, I view talent development as a very holistic process. So don't let me being a producer fool you. I'm kidding. Yeah, totally. Whatever. Let's continue.
Sure thing. I mean, for most people who know, you guys are obviously experts in this topic. But if you wouldn't mind, sort of introducing yourself, what your current position is, as well as your background in both the esports space and also how those positions led to a sort of specialization in talent development.
So, hi, I'm Peter Dunn. I'm the head of coaching staff of Evil Geniuses, who are a team that play in the LCS. I've worked in various regions over the years. 10 years now in esports, just over now, almost 11 now. And yeah, most recently, I've been working over 3 teams, and looking forward to talking about some of the strategies that we have in Evil Geniuses and some of our approaches towards scouting and development in this region.
I'm Kelsey. I was previously a journalist who wrote a lot about League of Legends. Most recently, I worked on coaching and development in 100 Thieves and Evil Geniuses. I helped coach Academy for EG, but was the head Academy coach and assisted in founding the 100 Thieves Next program for 100 Thieves before coming to EG last year and working on some of the scouting systems and development programming there.
All right. So I'm gonna my first question is, it's the same question to you guys, but sort of different context because of both your histories. That Peter, your position in EG is obviously similar to the one that you had with Mad Lions in the LEC. And Kelsey, you've gone from working in talent development for an organization and now being sort of an overseeing, producer and someone who's really has a big picture perspective on the entire, academy and amateur space, which is, obviously a huge conversation point in talent development in North America. The question to both of you is how have you had to change your approach in doing what you do now, and how does that differ from your previous position, and did those previous positions help you in this new position in any way?
So do you mean compared to between North America and Europe, or?
Yeah, specifically in the case of how talent development differs in the region. Obviously, the regional leagues and the academy amateur system are very different, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And Kelsey, kind of the same between your most two recent positions as well.
So I think that the big difference when coming over from Europe to North America is how less developed the lower league structure is in North America. So obviously in recent years, since I've been here, they've introduced a new proving ground circuit, and obviously collegiate has been given a lot more exposure. But if we think about, we compare the lower leagues, which is where your talent development on both the playing side and the coaching side. I think the coaching side is really important, and I hope we talk a little bit more about that over the course of the next hour. But if you look at the development in Europe, you have, the French league, you have the German league, you have the Spanish league. They all feed into European Masters. This is a very successful infrastructure that has developed lots of talent coming up for 5 years now. 5 years? 5 years, I think. And when we compare this to the infrastructure that kind of I got exposed to when I came to North America 18 months ago, that structure kind of didn't exist. You had sort of amateur teams and you had collegiate teams, but there was no clear pathway to pro. And I think it makes it in a system like this, it becomes very hard to scout for really high quality talent. You know, you can scout people from solo queue. You can have a good idea of their strengths or weaknesses. But when you're bringing somebody into, for instance, say an academy team, you're kind of hoping that a player there, because there's the stage just below LCS, and a lot of the LCS teams use their academy teams to run 6-man or 10-man rosters. You hope for kind of a more developed product. Whereas a lot of the people that were being brought into academy teams before kind of didn't have much competitive experience at all. And on the coaching side, it was even more. I'm sure Kelsey will go into more detail than this in future, because she was the one who was most responsible for interviewing coaches in the 2021-2022 off season. But then the 2020 to 2021 off season, I interviewed 34 people for 2 coaching positions.
Wow.
And I'm going to be frank. And these, a lot of these people were very qualified candidates with LCS coaching experience, with history of coaching overseas. And I'll be frank, like, of the candidates, we didn't find 2 qualified candidates to fill the position. We found one, who is Turtle, who's now the LCS head coach, head coach, the LCS head coach, who you may have seen on the in stage in Korea or during the LCS. But basically, there wasn't that knowledge. And worse than that, it was very clear when we were doing a lot of the interview process, when we were looking for coaches, that a lot of those people either didn't have the experience or didn't even know, what kind of things that they should be appealing to and what kind of things that they should be promoting in their interviews, which was really, really concerning, because obviously when you talk about talent development is about finding the right players and putting the resources around them to succeed. But how can you have a team, a roster full of very, very young players without having the coaching staff around them to make sure that those players develop and those players find success? And I think that this is one similarity, I guess, if you were to say, between the approach used on Mad Lions and the approach used on EG. It's coaches as well. You want to develop your players, you want to have veteran players, you want to have rookie players that you want to develop, but also you want to have coaches, and you want to have coaches that develop, and you want to have coaches that have an idea over what they need to develop. And I think one thing that was really concerning 18 months ago, when I was interviewing coaches in North America and asking what can EG do as an org to help you develop and help you develop your skills, almost no coach gave me a proper answer. Like it's orgs develop coaches. They give me resources to develop. The very idea was like alien, whereas in Europe it was a bit difficult in Europe, but when I was interviewing people like Duke or Mac or just Cass back in the day, people that were on Mad Lions and who are still on Mad Lions or who were on Mad Lions or Splice over the last 3 years, those guys had an idea. They had an idea of these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, this is how you as a coach can help me develop. And I think that knowledge comes from experience working in the ERLs. Duke had many years in ERLs. Mac worked in Brazil. He worked in various other regions. He has a lot of that experience, and with that comes a greater sense of self-awareness. And I think that that's something that maybe is very, very lacking in North America as well. So it's hard to find the players because you don't have the infrastructure around them. You can look at their solo queue, but you're bringing them into an academy structure. You're taking them away from home, and you're putting them in a very uncomfortable environment, and they have to sink or swim very, very quickly. Coupled with a coaching environment, which basically where you don't have people understanding what they need to be a good coach, what they need to develop as a coach, and having both of those things combined, I think made the situation very challenging. I think things have improved a lot this year, which maybe we'll talk about later. But definitely the situation in North America was pretty dire, to be honest, 18 months ago. But things have been changing for the positive. So hopefully some of those things we can talk about later.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really interesting because you talk about the coaches, but you're looking at the coaches in NA versus the coaches in EU, and the talent in NA versus the talent in EU as well in terms of player talent. And both the player talent requires different skill sets in a lot of cases. I remember because I had coached for HTK, which our results in summer were not insane, but at the same time, like I was working with a rookie player there, and the skill set of working with a rookie player versus going to NA and working with my first team in NA was 4 rookie players and one like slightly more experienced. And some of the stuff that I didn't realize I would have to learn how to teach were really, really basic things, like how many creeps do you need to do to freeze a creep wave, or what time does scuttle crab spawn? Like what time do do jungle camp spawn on rotation every time, and just very, very basic fundamentals. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat in on amateur scrum reviews where the coaches don't quite understand what what level their players are at. And the coaches will be talking about like, here's how you do lane swaps, and here's how you play like 2-3 on the map. And then I'll talk to the players afterward and be like, so guys, when does Scuttle Grab spawn? They won't be able to give me an answer, Like, it's crazy to say that kind of thing, but that happens very frequently. And it's just this idea of the development coaching is not sexy, and it's also not understood. So a lot of times the least experienced coaches end up being coaching the development phase, whereas if you look at sports, there are coaches who specialize in development their entire careers. They'll have like 20-year careers just being development coaches as opposed to being like championship coaches. And those are very different skill sets. So trying to find someone who wants to stay in the development space as opposed to like using it as a ladder to go on and win championships is very hard. And I don't necessarily think we should ask for them to do that, because I don't think we're giving enough resources or enough pay or anything like that to coaches in the development space for them to like make a career out of it. But the idea then becomes like, how quickly can I develop a coach so that coach can teach my players faster, right? So you need to teach the coach faster to teach the players faster before that coach gets good enough to go on and play and coach LCS, So that's the trick.
The exact thing, Kelsey, like if I'm going to put all these resources into this coach, how long until they're gone for LCS? Because the talent, there's a gap at the top of the pipeline, and there's a lot of people that want to pass through the system as quickly as possible. I think just to add on to Kelsey's point as well about players in North America needing a complete different skill set, to talk about two of the most hyped rookies of recent years. You look at somebody like Kazi, or you look at somebody like Flacket, and they're rookies in Europe in the LEC. But Kazi was playing in the ERLs for 4 years before he was on Mad Lions. Flacket has been there for 3 years at least. When you talk about rookie players in North America, Jojo didn't even play League of Legends like a year and a half ago, right? Like Danny was, his first team, he went from one split in an amateur team straight to LCS. Like when we talk about rookies, these are not the same things, Like, and sure, you have the occasional rookie in Europe who is like a Jojo, like an Elioria would be the perfect example. He comes out of nowhere, Spanish second division MVP, Spanish MVP next year, double LEC title in his first year. But these are really, really rare. And I think Elioria is the only one that I can think off the top of my head, because even people like Caps were in Turkey, they were in like the European leagues for I think Caps was 18 months, 24 months before he was in Fnatic. So I think that these are a lot of challenges, and development coaching is not, for lack of a word, not a sexy title, right? Like, and it's not the things that maybe people aspire to, but it's something that in a region like North America where you don't have those structures in place to give people those experience, that's what you need the most. But at the same time, you have a paucity of talent hoping to fill those roles. So I think that's a big challenge moving forward. I think some of the things that have changed in North America recently, strengthening of the amateur circuit, the integration of amateur and academy and proving grounds. I think proving grounds is one of the most important things that has happened to North America, in recent years. And I don't know who pushed that through, but, we talk about Champions Queue, we talk about, all of these other changes that have done for North America, but the proving grounds, the changing of the proving grounds circuit to give people a way to get exposure and get experience without going through a rigid academy system, prove themselves outside of that system, is the single biggest change and most important change for North America in the moving forwards. And I think we're already beginning to see some of the positive impacts from that coming through. I think just as, maybe this is a little bit against the EG's position, but sometimes there's a certain type of player and a certain type of coach that develops well within an academy system, and there's some that develop better outside, and having a contrast is always very, very useful, right? So people have different options. Some people develop through solo queue, some people develop through academy. When I talk about academy is very, very structured, very coach led, very organization led. Whereas we talk about like an amateur roster, that's a bit more open. The goal in academy isn't necessarily to win. The goal in academy is to develop. Whereas the goal for, I'm sure, a team like, just off the top of my head, like AOE randoms, or I can think of, I can name all the academy, like 300 or something like that. Their goal is not necessarily to develop; it's to win proving grounds. And I think having that contrast is always is always a good thing. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you miss out on, that's in the ERL space, is that there are a lot of orgs that are not like academy teams that have a fair amount of like funding and visibility, sponsorship, generally speaking, and a lot of eyes on the players within the systems. And whereas academy orgs are almost always going to be beholden to what the LCS org needs. So the goal for the academy org is never, the academy team within an org is never going to be to win. It's going to be to help the LCS team win. So that means that maybe something that happened to me, 3/4 of my splits as an academy head coach was partway through the split, like some of my best players got taken to LCS, and I just had to accept it, and figure out what to do from there to make sure that I wasn't letting down the players left behind, because it wasn't that they weren't talented or weren't skilled. It was just that they had spent time working on a team dynamic and getting results within that team dynamic that was now completely blown apart, right? And so then people would look at the players left over, players like Prismal, etc., who it's like, okay, they're skilled, but maybe not skilled enough to make LCS in the minds of people, because suddenly they're in a situation where they're having to start over halfway through the split. So things like that, I think, are always going to be difficult to handle from an academy perspective. At the same time, I do think we're still in a position where amateur organizations are not quite at the level as like something like a KC Corp. They're still very much like groups of friends, like Super Sunshine Folk Basket Warriors, DK Crew, things like that are just like people who are banding together after school, and they might not even have like an experienced coach or something along those lines, just people who are happy to like help them schedule and things like that. And so I do think that the emphasis within Proving Ground Circuit should still be to an extent on development, which is where, you asked me before, how do I transition into my new job? My new job is very much about how do we help craft and change the narrative around some of these players so that we don't come in as fans, as an audience member, as LCS orgs, and say, this team didn't win Proving Grounds, so all their players must suck. We instead focus on, look at this really cool performance by someone who placed like 30th, stuff like that, and go from there.
No, I completely agree with that. And whilst I think development obviously is important, and from the perspective of an org like Evil Geniuses, obviously we use our EG Prodigies team to take risks on players. We pick a lot of very high potential, high volatility, high risk players that we think have a long shot, but we believe that can develop in a way that maybe you don't take the same risks in academy as you would in amateur. But for me, having orgs, so obviously there was a lot of scandals with a new and Solafide and things like this, not paying players and things like this, but have in the last year in 2021, but having those orgs being able to pick up veterans and being able to pay veterans is actually really, really good for an LCS org who wants to develop people in the amateur circuit. Like I have on my amateur team, I have a really talented mid laner called Doxa who has insanely high potential, and the best thing for him is that he gets to play against Ryoma this split. He gets to play against Ryoma, he gets to play against Darkwings, who was in Academy, Ryoma obviously who's played LCS, and I can't think of anything better for his development than scrimming against those guys and playing against those guys on a regular basis. And hopefully this is something that Academy can provide in the future. But obviously from the LCS side, again, Academy and Amateur is to develop the next generation of JoJo's or Danny's, right? Like it's not necessarily to win the tournament, but you can't develop without strong competition to play against. And you get that through greater development of the infrastructure in the amateur scene, and also through things like Champions Queue and through other options. But you need the exposure, right, to better players. And I think that's something that we're seeing moves towards. So I think that they are promising signs. But we're still a long way from being there yet. And when I look, between the 2021 and 2022 season, I think one of the best examples for this would be for when EG promoted Jojo, right? Maybe it's because the story about Jojo Pion wasn't properly told. Maybe it's because people were not so good at assessing differences in talent. But the amount of things that a player, a 17-year-old like that, had to go through, with all the Jensen, hate and all of this kind of thing. He's been through a lot already in one split. Like, I mean, he's experienced stuff that. Maybe in Europe where they have a little bit more tolerance for rookies, maybe in Europe you have the opposite approach, where people maybe are tossing rookies too quickly. I think that North America, I think we have that issue as well. Where maybe in Europe, maybe the fan base wants the rookies to be given a bit more of a chance, whereas in North America, it's the orgs that want the players to be given more of a chance, and the fan base which maybe wants to toss them aside. Whereas in Europe, I think it's the opposite way around. But maybe that's just my experience on EG, and maybe it's not the same across all orgs. But I can't talk for all orgs, obviously, in the LCS.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh, I was just going to say, very quick comment. I think this is something that has exists between the two ecosystems for years, because I think one of the last videos I made as a full-time content creator before I went into coaching was contrasting the fan reception to upset going to an LCS team versus the fan reception to Licorice going to an LCS team, because they went to LCS because it was still EU LCS at the time at the same year, right? And everyone was saying, "Oh no, C9 is trolling. Like C9 lost the offseason. I can't believe that they would replace." I think it was Impact, if I recall correctly, with Licorice, and oh my god, he's so bad. And that was the year that they made it all the way to semifinals, right? And Licorice actually looked pretty decent against even some of the international top liners at the events, and Upset had so much hype, actually, I think, as a rookie. People were super excited about Upset. So for me, it was why is it like this? And a lot of it was just the infrastructural development having a gigantic discrepancy. And for me, that was always something that led me to the NA ecosystem and the development scene, and just now trying to create those narratives so that people can be excited about NA rookies, So
Kelsey, I mean, maybe this is spilling your job secrets, but how do you get NA fans interested in upcoming young NA talent?
Well, you find a host named Kangas, and you make him work out in front of the camera. No, I think a lot of it is just about, and this is something that we continue to talk about and be having conversations about, is focusing storylines more on individual players versus teams, right? And I think that that's something that talent and casters are so focused on doing, is the team narrative, the org narrative. But you really want to demonstrate and show the individual personalities and give opportunities to individual players to market themselves in a way other than their gameplay, right? Because their gameplay is going to be so subjective. The normal fan isn't going to know what is actually winning the game versus what is losing the game. So they won't have the best judge. But if you can give them a soundbite of a player saying something funny or things like this, then fans will want to root for them, So I think that that's a big part of it. The other element is just constantly kind of forcing, emphasizing and having conversations with my casters about being honest. We should talk about individual players more. We should talk about this player's performance more, and really hype up players on lower tier teams as well as teams that are exciting because they're winning, So finding that balance and trying to make that happen is, generally speaking, what we do. I always say that Academy itself, before you get into Proving Grounds, we don't even have a playoffs, right? Or a tournament set up. We have 8 weeks or so of games that seed into Proving Grounds, and your results don't really matter other than to give you a Proving Ground seed. So I always say, Academy is a Netflix series. It's not a tournament. So how can we make that exciting and make all the characters come to life? So that's more or less the way we approach it.
Something I found really interesting about most of what both of you have said so far is that you've put heavy emphasis on not just the idea of coaches developing, players, but also coaches developing coaches, right? To know how to have this different sort of developmental approach, which I feel is very different from what I often see as a public, among fans. One thing I always see people saying on Reddit and whatnot is, oh, well, it's just harder to find talent in NA. The ERL is so many more players and more structured leagues. And whereas talking to you guys, it sounds more, it's like, oh no, people just need to have the right skill set to, when they find the talent, to do that regardless of what region. Does scouting still play, like how big of a part does scouting play in talent development? And do the differences in the regions actually affect your approach to the entire process?
I mean, scouting is important. Obviously, scouting is important, and lots of teams have different approaches to scouting. I think Kelsey may have a lot to say about that as she's developed the scouting processes for multiple teams. But I think from my experience with scouting, players in Europe and scouting players in North America, it's important to have a system that allows for a lot of different opinions without being too inefficient, right? So I think on EG, I'm not sure how much of this is public knowledge or not, so I won't go into too many details, but we have, 4 to 5 people who do scouting reports, within EG, and all of those people have very, very different ideas of what makes a good League of Legends player, what makes a good mid laner, what makes a good jungler, what makes a good AD carry. But the important thing is to find a system that allows you to come to some kind of consensus, or at least, if you're not getting the number one, your number one choice for a particular position, you're getting your number 2 or your number 3, right? And when you're talking about scouting, there has to be a system that allows for inputs and for an understanding that not everyone will have the same approach. Because if you have a scouting structure where it's like a test, like if you're a scout and you don't come up with the right answer that your head coach wants, then you're bad scout, go away, right? I think that kind of system is always dangerous for teams to have, and I think that sometimes having that sort of hive mind approach to scouting is obviously very complicated. And if you have different teams with different people within teams with different approaches, then they're going to value some different things. Some people are going to value stage matches, some people are going to value higher variance in players, some people are going to value low variance, stage matches versus solo queue. And I mean, I think that on Mad Lions it is public. Basically, we had 3 scouts, which were Mac, Aranea, and I, and we just did a list. Right, we did a list of the top 10 people for every position. Top 5 people we would have as a short list. Everyone had to talk to everyone had to track everyone really closely on that. Then we would agree, okay, this is number 1 target, this is number 2 target, and we talk to nobody else, right? And like all those other guys are just reserves, we just talk to that. Now the EG approach is a little bit, cast the net a little bit wider, talk to a lot more people. Again, I'm not too sure how much of this is public knowledge, so I don't want to share too much on it. But both of those structures work because it's about lots of different inputs and coming to a conclusion that way. Obviously I've gone on record about this, but the things that I value is I value upside, I value variance. I think is really good, and I value ability under pressure. And self-confidence, actually, like self-confidence is something that I value highly. But obviously those are very, very broad and vague terms, and you have to have a structure that allows you to sort of narrow those ideas. What are good mechanics? What is confidence? What is these are very ethereal concepts, and a good coaching, a good scouting structure will account for all of those things. Yeah, but maybe Kelsey would want to go into more detail.
Oh yes. By all means.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely interesting because I think like the 100 Thieves environment, it's actually like the coaches and staff I worked there, like we all had very similar ideas of like what a good player was, right? So it was like we go to the scouting meeting, we show clips, we talk about the players, right? And we come away with this idea. And I think like one thing that's important for scouting is that everyone watches like similar games and can have the same game, like a common list of games and can have like a conversation about like what's valuable in different aspects of it, right? So I think that's like a really good thing about scouting, and having scouting meetings, because if you're missing like that conversation element, then you're not really going to get to a consensus of what Peter talked about with like the different viewpoints, etc. So I think that like for 100 Thieves, it was like, yep, this is good, this is bad, whatever, move on. Whereas like the EG scouting meetings were much more like very different opinions, and you have to be willing to have like thicker skin. So if someone says you're trolling, then you can still have a productive conversation, right? So I think that was like a very different environment. The biggest difference between those two team environments that I was on. I think for me, the exciting thing about scouting development is you have to have like much more. You have to get way more granular about the like what Peter talked about, which is like what is good mechanics. So like what elements of this play are good? Is it the way that he's taking into account these different variables? Is it the way that he's spacing properly, using this ability? So you have to kind of take into account and break down the variables in the team fights to talk about like what is good mechanics, what is good execution, and like kind of create a pyramid of layers of like what this player is doing well within those things, which is why it's like when I'm going for like strictly amateur players, I basically just watch team fights, because it's like you have so many different variables that you have to consider and take into account in a team fight as a player. And it's like, oh, this guy accounted for this cooldown and like saved his flash for this, or this guy did X, Y, and Z. Like those things will stand out to you. It's like, okay, this person is actively thinking about and still able to react to these variables, and that's like the really and like the movement is very clean, or the clicking is very clean. So like POVs are really important. Things like this I think are great for scouting. And when you talk about developmental talent, if you're talking about players who might not even be able to know how to freeze a wave, right? Which I think, by the way, this is like at this point, I think the standard of knowledge in solo queue and NA has actually improved a lot in the past few years. But so this was like years and years ago that I'm talking about. I think most players actually know how many creeps freeze a wave at this point in NA challengers. So I'm not trying to dish. Most do. There, you still get the occasional ones, but like for me, it's definitely one of those things where you have to take into account anything that you can teach within like 1 to 2 coaching sessions, like any concept-based thing, you can't really include as a variable in your scouting for an amateur player, because you have to kind of be able to say like, oh, I can teach this within 2 weeks, and then this player will be able to do it, and it doesn't matter. You have to really talk about the way that their mind is working in team fights and the way that they're automatically thinking about these situations, which is why I think but when I came to EG, actually, I think we had a lot of players who weren't good at team fights, but they were good at different things, and they were good at different framework structuring. So I think that was interesting, because that was like on EG was the first time where I had to work with players and teach team fight concepts. So I think like there are definitely improvements even on that system that you can go through and get to. Yeah.
And to add to what Kelsey says, obviously things like, threat assessment, spacing, like if a player gets caught out in a team fight because they didn't properly assess something, or they decided to save their flash because they thought they could dodge, how do we mark something like that down? Is that bad threat assessment because he got caught by the Zoe bubble, or was he trying to dodge? Was he aware that the Zoe bubble was coming but trusted his mechanics and just failed his mechanical execution? So you have to have common ground on that kind of thing. And the second thing you have to have common ground on is things like, if you're taking a sample, you can't watch 100 games of every single player, right? Like there's just no time. If you need to scout for 3 different teams, that's 15 different players. And, you're not scouting just 15 different players, you're scouting 5 people for each different position, right? So, another question that orgs have to ask themselves and scouts have to ask themselves, is what kind of games do you watch? Is a game where the player you're scouting goes 17-0 a valuable game? Is a game where they go 0-8 a valuable game? Or do you want to have games where they're very solid? Some games they do quite well, some games they do quite badly. What kind of sample are you going to draw from? And if you're going to look at high variance games, how much of the sample of your scouting is devoted to those kind of things, and those discussions and those that common ground is something that has to be reached on every single org, and it's not something that all orgs will do the same, and it's not something that all coaching staff will do the same. So when we talk about scouting, there's all these differences in approach. But what matters, I think, is having a structure that you stick to and setting rules of engagement that you stick to and don't change the process just because you like a certain player. And if you have an agreement in your first scouting meeting, this is what we need for our team. We have these 3 players existing, or we have these 4 players, and this is the whole we need. We need like a really good shot, a really good shot caller. We need somebody who's really strong laning, and we don't care too much about his team fighting or something like this, right? Like, you have to be willing to stick to those kind of variables and not change too much because when you change one thing, it has a massive knock-on effect. And in LCS, that can be the difference between winning and losing games, making or missing playoffs or otherwise, or worlds, even in a worst case scenario. But in an academy or an amateur team, it's arguably even worse for the players, not for the org, because obviously the org is about winning. But you mess up that in amateur, and you're going to have a team where everyone looks dreadful because your balance of experience and youth didn't work, or your balance of aggression and passivity didn't work, or your balance of high resource players versus low resource players didn't work. And now everyone on the team looks garbage because you've signed 5 high resource players. And your team doesn't function, and now everyone looks bad, and now they don't get to go from amateur to academy. So I think there's a lot of responsibility you have when you're doing that level to your org to find good players, but also to the players themselves to put themselves in the environment that they can develop and succeed. And I think that's important.
I think basically piggybacking off of our earlier conversation, the coaching, who is the coach of the team, is also a really big thing to consider that I think people don't kind of realize or understand. Like, if you have a more experienced academy coach or amateur coach, then you can go with 5 players who have never been in a team before and don't know what they're doing. But if you have a really inexperienced coach and you're setting up like a team of 5 rookies, then that team is not going to have anywhere to draw knowledge or experience on. So that's why I think when you look at certain academy teams and you say, like, why are there like 2 players who have played LCS before on this is an academy, then you really have to look at who is coaching this team and kind of come to a conclusion of like your experience or your expertise on the game has to come from somewhere. And a lot of people like kind of have a very black or white view of what is a good coach. And if you don't already have the answers, you're a bad coach. But a lot of times, like, you can't get an experienced, like, excellent coach who's never coached League of Legends before, right? They have to start somewhere. So keep in mind that you do have to have like some leeway for the balance of both things. So take into account like the coach's level of experience and the coach's level of knowledge when you're assessing like the balance of team experience as well.
I have one more subtopic for you guys before we get into some Q&A questions we've got for you here. But because we've touched on talent development in general overall, we've touched on how scouting plays a part. But something we haven't talked about is we've seen this both in the LCS and the LEC, where we'll occasionally have a rookie and they'll have a great rookie split or even a rookie year, and then they may have a sophomore slump or just kind of gradually decline. Or do you think that there are things that you can do and sort of impart to a player in the developmental process at the lower levels that like specifically help with career longevity past just having a hot start, but actually staying hot and continuing to develop into an elite talent?
Want to go first on this, Kelsey? I just want to think about that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing to learn as a young player is how to teach yourself. And so whenever I'm talking about coaching, I think a lot of people's perception of coaching by watching like content creator coaching VODs is that, oh, he shouldn't have clicked here. He should have clicked here. He should have done X or he should have done Y. And that will teach you like how you should have played to win that game. And if you can extrapolate from that, like larger concepts, then that's like really smart individual knowledge. But the coach isn't doing that for you. Like the coach should be giving you the concept from which you will derive what you should have done in that particular game so that you can apply that concept to future games and win future games, because the goal is to win future games and not that particular game that you just played. So I think that that's, for me, like if you're a player who knows that the variety of coaching you're going to get is going to be really inconsistent team to team, or to org, level to level, then you should be in a position like some LCS teams have coaches who don't teach the game at all, right? They just kind of are really, really good at managing personalities and creating a way and a method for the team to work together to explore. So from that perspective, the like specific game learning is going to be a self-responsibility issue, right? So if you can create your own frameworks, like I almost call it coach brain, like where you are able to create a system for yourself to teach. Like certain players that I've met, like I would say Serdi is a good example. Like the first time I coached him, I realized he just had coach brain because he already had systems in place for like understanding and learning different things. He doesn't play like that on stage all the time, but he definitely does. Like if you talk to him about the game, very much already understands this concept and framework. So if you can teach that and impart that and learn that at a lower level, I think that will really, really help your career in a lot of ways.
For sure. I mean, the difference between systematic learners and like more instinctive learners, I think, being a good idea. Idea of the contrast. I just want to say that I really admire your optimism that a player will definitely get 2 splits or 1 split before they come and face with these challenges. Because obviously I've got it on record that I think if you've gone to the effort to promote somebody from your academy team or from ERLs as a rookie, they deserve 2 splits to be given a chance. In the very, very worst case, 1 split if like everything is going completely awfully, but like you generally need at least 2 splits because of how the meta changes and the adaptation period. But if you're talking about things like a sophomore slump, sometimes it can be because of how the dynamics in the team have changed. So a good example of this, maybe you look at a player like Elyoya in Mad Lions, who goes from being the best jungler in Europe. I mean, Jankos fans will say Jankos, but Elyoya was the best jungler in Europe in 2021. He won both the titles, and he was arguably the second best player on his team to do it as a rookie. And going into how he performed this year, it's a change of variables. Mid jungle, his mid laners left. Now the qualities that he was relying on have changed as well, and his role now requires more responsibility. And I think that the evolving dynamics within the team, just in terms of gameplay, but also in terms of social dynamics, these kind of things are permanently evolving, and sometimes it's a case of just refinding that balance, and it's not the easiest thing to do. Like there's a reason teams don't stay together for huge periods of time in League of Legends. I think 2 years, is probably the max that I can think of for any team. And even when G2 did that with their like kind of legendary team, they did a lot of things to keep things fresh. And I think it's important not just to think about people that you're playing with inside the games as being tools to get you to victory, but also as being teammates, as being friends, because that kind of thing is the thing that will sustain a team in the long run. Power of friendship sounds so cheesy, but there is power in friendship. Sophomore slumps can be overcome if you have the right infrastructure around. But if it's a shift in responsibility, it's telling the Mad Lions change their mid laner, right? Even though I know Mac is somebody who really, really values rookies because they needed something to get the best out of Elyoya, which they couldn't get. But if you're not making changes and you're going through that sophomore slump, having that structure in place where your teammates will support you and help you to try to get better and help you work through that slump, rather than going to the next, coach, player GM meeting or saying we need to change this guy. He's dragging the team down. He's dragging me down. Having those kind of things in place are really important.
Definitely. All right. Well, we still have a little bit of time left. I'd like to go to the Q&A from our Discord. First question here. What is the best way for a talent, player, coach, analyst, pretty much any kind from a different region to present themselves for a team in the LEC or the LCS in terms of trying to get an opportunity in one of those major regions?
Want to go first, Kelsey?
I learn better by reading the questions, so I'm just guessing.
I'll go first. Teams do open applications, right? When you're doing an open application, we could speak for hours on how to do a good job application for teams in NA, and you could do the same strategy you would use to get a job at EG, and you'd go to TSM, and they're looking for something else, right? So first of all, know the team you're applying for, know the coaching infrastructure you're applying to be a part of, and know how you can contribute, number one. Number two, respect the region that you are going for. If I ever get another interview where the coach who is not from NA tells me that they don't watch NA and they don't watch any EG games because NA is not a good region, I will. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I will not be pleased. Respect the region you're going to, respect the team that you're going to watch the games, right? Third thing, know basics about resume presentation and like interview technique. If you can't present yourself to me in an interview at a basic level, like you're super nervous so that you're not making any sense, or like you're late, you're late for the interview, or your resume looks like it's done by a 12-year-old or something, that's going to count against you. First impressions are really, really important. The good thing that we're seeing in NA over recent years is more teams are doing open applications. EG do open applications in October, November, so make sure to apply. But what will make you stand out will be at least on the EG side, is not what you've done, but your capability to learn and your ability for self-awareness and your plan for what will make you better, right? And obviously you can't be completely useless, right? Like there's a basic understanding that if you know how to self-teach, that you'll have a basic understanding of the game, but you're not expected to be like an international coma level coach just to get a job as, academy assistant coach on Evil Geniuses, right? Like that's not what the expectation is. But ability to present yourself and ability to leave a good first impression is obviously really important, and some basic fundamentals in coaching theory and game knowledge, right?
Yeah, I think I recently did a video on this. I think it's still pinned to my Twitter, in terms of like my learnings from basically leading the open application coaching process this last offseason in EG. I think the biggest thing for me that Peter didn't say was DMs. He talked about knowing the team that you're applying to, but like reaching out actively to like coaches and asking them like what they're looking for, or trying to talk to them early on in the season about their games, but ask specific questions. So it's not just like, how do I get a job, or what makes a good coach? Because then people will ignore those. But if you ask specific things like, in this particular game, I noticed your team did this, or you said this in a video, or you said this on Twitter the other day. Like, what did you mean by that? And trying to get more knowledge and talk to and strike up a conversation like that. If you want resume feedback, some people will respond to that. Things along those lines. I'm less big on the respecting the region thing. I may or may not have hired someone who said that they didn't watch any EG games. I will not say who, so that Peter doesn't hate that person. But
I
know. But I think the general thing is just, again, like knowing who you're reaching out to, knowing who you're applying to, and just using the social network. Like when I recently did my videos on the MSI teams, I was just, again, reminded by how accessible and how global League of Legends esports is. Like, just, I would DM like a random player going to MSI and be like, do you have a minute to just like give me a few answers to these questions that I had from watching your games? And they're just like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I think it is very, like, people tend to be very open as long as you're respectful and you let them know like why you're doing it, or why you're interested, and are understanding that that's not their only job is to help you get a job. So I think that would be number one. Number two for me is don't neglect things that people don't talk about, which is coaching theory. I think people, like Peter mentioned coaching theory, but like people will talk a lot about the game and like elements of the game that they need to teach. And I can't believe that NA Academy teams all ARAM mid, et cetera, and X, Y, and Z. But if I ask, like, there are so many people who wanted to be head coaches who I asked them, like, how do you structure a week of practice? And they had no idea how to answer that question or what I even meant, So just make sure that you're thinking about stuff that's not just in-game coaching as well.
Gotcha. I'm going to squeeze in one more question from the Q&A before we have to wrap up here, because I'm very interested in hearing both of your answers to this question. Will NA ever see a Korea-style trainee role where the player doesn't have any stage games, but are there purely to develop? In terms of, practicing with the starting roster, I assume, is what the question is implying.
I have to ask how Tenacity found it on 100 Thieves lost it. I think as long as NA is best of one, I don't think you're going to have that. I think that the reason why Korea and China can afford to have those things is because they play best of three. You're maybe one of the top teams in the league. You're playing one of the bottom teams of the league. Maybe you're Invictus Gaming playing Vici. You don't put your CEO in for game two. You put your new rookie trainee in. Give him a shot. He gets some game experience and he can build that experience over time. In best of ones, you just don't have the opportunity. It's really, really hard. So I can't imagine a style where that could happen. I can imagine it on the coaching side, but on the playing side, I think it would be difficult, especially at LCS stuff. Maybe at Academy or Amateur, but not at LCS.
Yeah, I've had 2 teams where I've had a 6-man roster, and the player, like the 6th man, didn't get that much stage time. So I think that those situations are very much it's very difficult to juggle that person not being bored, that's number one, and keeping them engaged and active within the scrims themselves. So making sure that you're having active one-on-ones with them, etc. But it does take a lot to balance, and it's something that you have to practice doing, and you're probably the first time you do it going to screw over the person that is the trainee by giving them less attention. So that's something that be mindful of. That's the other thing is as a rookie coach, you make a lot of mistakes, and it's always about making sure that people are aware that your players are learning and you're learning at the same time, and that people don't immediately judge for one game or one split or on things like that happen. So I think that those are definitely reasons why the trainee system is less appealing at the moment, just because the region is underdeveloped. If the region gets more developed, more fleshed out, then I think you'll have trainee systems that are people actually know what to do with the 6th person, that they're not just sitting around and saying, "Can I play solo queue?"
Gotcha.
that kind of element of it. So I think that that's definitely, if the scene gets more developed, you'll see more of that. But right now, I think there's just not. People will add players as trainees, but not have a program or have an actual plan for what to do with that person. So I think right now it's not likely.
Well, I appreciate all of your insights so much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for watching. IGEC 2022, excuse me, will be going on a short break, but when we get back, we will have a panel on all things VTubing, and after that, an interview with Iron Mouse. So we'll see you soon.